Welcome to the Civic Works Committee meeting of June 7th, 2017. I'll call the meeting to order. And I'll look to my colleagues for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I'll move on. I have just a few housekeeping announcements. We've got some addeds. Number one, I'll look for a motion to move item 12 from the consent items to the scheduled items. There's a presentation with there. I'll note that on item 16, pages 140 to 202 for the transfer for payment agreement those start before Appendix B, or should start before Appendix B. So there was two items that were reversed there. Item 19 is there is a revised electronic report, and that's what we'll be voting on. Okay, and we also have a number of addeds. A couple of added sources of financing, and my note to staff is anytime you want to come with an added source of financing, that's fine. Even if you don't have a project, you can come with those. We'll be happy to do something with it as a council. Okay. All right, and I think in item 10, there's also an appendix that's now made available in the added. So I'll ask the clerk to put up a motion to move item 12 out, and in the meantime, I'll ask my colleagues if there's any numbers in the consent items that they would like pulled. Councillor Armstrong.
I'm going to say items 2, item 4, item 5, and item 6.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Ridley.
I was waiting to see what my colleagues pulled because I have comments on several items, so I will make those either as they're pulled or when they come up. And so the only one that I think we should probably address separately is item 3. So we can pull that and I'll have comments on a number of items.
Thank you. Okay, so that would mean we would need a motion for from 7 to 21, except for number 10. So that,
Except for 20, except for 12,
except for 12,
right?
and 10 was also pulled.
I'm sorry.
So 7 to 9, 11, 13 to 21.
Okay.
So at this point, I'd also like to thank a member of staff who is attending their final Civic Works Committee meeting, Mr. John Lucas, who's had a very fine career here at the City of London, and who is going to be succeeded by Mr. Scott Mathers, who's taking over water and wastewater. So welcome and a fond farewell. And I wonder if Ms. Schur has any words to say?
Thank you very much for the chance to acknowledge John at committee. John's been a long-serving staff member at the City of London, is actually a member of the Public Utilities Commission prior to that. And while John is not quite done yet, he's going to be with us officially towards fall. The fishing season is upon us, and we're not going to see too much of him, so you will be in Scott's capable hands. But if I could ask you to join me in thanking John, if it's appropriate.
John, I hope you enjoy your summer, and I'm wishing you more bites than the IT department. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. Now that that motion is up, I would like to make my comments on the consent items, and I just got to toggle between screens. So I think, starting with number 9, I wanted to confirm how many waste and pumping stations or plants we have in the city. And also the report indicates that we're spending $40,000 annually. Was that per the 2 stations, or is that a combined total? The last question on that is the savings that we're expecting, 13,000 for Vauxhall. Are we expecting the same, or is the scope different between the plants?
Through the chair, with regard to your first comment about the number of treatment plants, we have 6. One will be decommissioned within the next year. As far as the actual savings, that savings is the total across the 2 plants and not just for the individual plant. And we do anticipate that those savings will be, that we experience at Vauxhall, will be proportionally the same for those other 2 plants.
Thank you, and I think that's my question because indicates $40,000 now annually, so that would be the 2 plants. And so the proportional savings, are we looking at 13,000, moving from 40,000 to 13,000, or 13,000 each? So 14,000 in savings. Could you just help me run those numbers?
I'll forward that to Jordy to actually provide the specifics on it, but my understanding it is the 13,000, but he'll clarify.
Through the chair, the 40,000 is between the Adelaide and the Pottersburg plants. So where we see 13,000 being saved at Vauxhall, we would expect to bring those 2 plants down to 13,000 roughly each. So we would be at 39 between the 3 of them, down from 53.
Thank you. That resolves my comments and questions on number 9, but I'm glad that Jordy is at the microphone because I have a question on item 11. I'm looking for a magic wand here because when I read this report, I think what I read is you were taking toilet waste plus $2 million and turning it into $20 million. Is that what I read?
Through the chair, we are taking the city's biosolids, 17,000 dry tons a year, and we will be generating electricity with the residual waste heat. So, however you you want to slice it, but it's a project we've been looking at for a number of years, and it's coming to fruition now.
So I think that's a great program, obviously a great initiative and an opportunity to realize some revenue for the city. So I wanted to draw some attention to that item. I don't know if other people have comments or I can keep going through my list.
You're happy to continue with the list, and I'm sure everybody's thrilled that they're able to contribute to the city's revenue-generating strategies.
So my other comment is on item 16. And I think I just wanted to draw attention to this, that, this is the first time we're seeing the 50% contribution from the federal government. And I wonder if it's a direct result of some of the MOUs and the programs that we're doing now, that we're being recognized in making positive investments in the infrastructure and things that are going to help our environment overall. It looks like 7% of all of the Clean Water Wastewater Fund is coming to London in this round. So I wonder if there's any comments on, how did we achieve such a good portion of this funding?
So I can absolutely note that we are seen as a leader, both in the academia, from the provincial, federal government as far as our service, and we have John Lukes to thank, and a lot for that. For the most part, it also is proportional to our population, so that's partially how we captured this funding, and it is specifically directed at that water and wastewater component. So those are a couple of the key reasons why we were able to achieve that kind of funding.
On item 17, Mr. Lucas may be prepared for this based on my other comments. So this is the Francis Margaret Ethel Street reconstruction, and looking back at some old reports, 2013, the State of Infrastructure report said we had 28.6 kilometers of combined sewer. That decreased to 21.75 in 2015 and 19.5 in 2016. I know I asked last time, I got some updated figures, but there was no scale on this map, so I wasn't able to really eyeball how much combined sewer we're going to be replacing with this project. I know that you had provided me with a 3.9 kilometer figure. Was this project included in that amount?
I'll pass this on to Tom Copeland, our Division Manager of Wastewater and Drainage Engineering, to provide some context.
Through the chair, Margaret, Ethel, and Francis are all combined sewer streets, so those will be repaired. Also, if you recall, earlier this year, East Mile Road and Oban, those are combined sewer areas, and they'll be removed as well. That'll leave us in the order of about 20 kilometers overall for our sewer system, and that's around 1.2% of the total sewer system that's combined. The next areas that we are looking to tackle are the downtown core, York Street. We've got some sewers, my tagline there is that they're older than Canada right now that are still in service, so we're ramping up to do that over the next few years. And hopefully we'll be taking those combined sewers out year by year as we go forward.
Thank you. I did know that we had about 19.5 kilometers left at the end of 2016, and so my question was, there was no scale on the map. Could you let me know with this specific project approximately what are we removing? Is it an additional kilometer worth? Is it 800 meters of combined? Do you have any idea?
I can give you that information, but not off the top of my head. So if you allow me to give that to you later.
Yep, no, that's great. I'm just kind of trying to keep tabs on it, and I know that we had 3.9 kilometers that were going to be done over the next 12 years, so I'm just wondering what amount of that 3.9 we're taking care of with this specific project. So item 19 I should have pulled because I do have a suggested amendment to make, so I don't know if we can still do that.
Sure, I can have the clerk remove item 19 from the motion.
That resolves my comments on all of those items.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on the items about to be passed? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I know that partly because I was interested in it, I had asked for this sort of postmortem report on the infrastructure projects. I know it was kicked back and then come forward to this meeting. I want to say I find it very helpful to have that kind of report on the construction activities. I know as my colleagues may or may not be aware of, a couple of the projects that were a bit more difficult happened to be in my ward. Last year, we ran into that boulder at the end of McCormick Boulevard trying to do the sewer, and Florence Street was quite an undertaking, and we ran into some problems with the railway in terms of getting their staff there to move things forward in a timely fashion. And I think it's helpful to understand what's causing some of these issues. I think it's also helpful if you look at the appendix to look at how under budget a lot of the projects are, and how on track the vast majority of the projects are. And I think it's helpful, especially to have that appendix to report out on all these activities to undertake. We usually only hear about the projects that go a bit sideways and not necessarily the things that are all on track. And I personally found that very helpful. On item number 18, nobody has pulled it. So maybe I'll be dealing with it at council, I guess, but I'm not totally convinced that we don't need to make some changes to the overnight parking program. I think what we've introduced with the 15-day pass is very successful and working pretty well. But looking at the numbers, you can see that people are still getting tickets, pretty much the same rate they were getting tickets before, which tells me that there's a similar amount of overnight parking happening on the streets from people who are not getting passes, which I think we can fix over time with education. But the part that I think maybe we need to be talking about is whether we need to have the overnight parking sort of exemption period end on Labor Day, or whether it should be later in the year as we have tried in the past. We did have it go all the way to November 1st, one of the years we were on council. I think we need to be considering that again. You can see the number of people who are getting tickets during that period where you can park on the street without any kind of pass at all is in the neighborhood of around 190 a month during that period. I think that might be a more reasonable solution, especially as we see, it's not snowing so much in October as it was in the past. Do we really need to get all of the cars off the streets in the month of October, for example, or even for that matter in later September? So I'm not sure if Ms. Dross wants to speak to the education side and how come we're still getting so many tickets, and whether when we give the tickets, we're actually telling people about the parking pass program, because I think that would be a helpful way of telling them. And then secondly, on that piece about maybe we should lengthen the window so that people can park without any kind of pass at all later in the year.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to speak to that. Some interesting statistics that I did prepare in case I was asked today. From September 1st, when the program became in effect, to May 15th, when the report was completed, there were 17,236 tickets issued. Of that, that is 13,484 plates. So there's a difference of about 4,000 plates or tickets that had multiple tickets. So it's pretty good to say that of the 17,236, over 11,000 were one-time ticket people. So those people have been now educated and understand the process. The next category for 2 tickets, there was 1,488 people who got 2 tickets. So those people, chances are going to have learned. We get right down to, I've got it right down to how many tickets for every plate. We have one that had 46, one that had 41, 3 that had 22. I can't fix that, okay? So as much as we like to think that some people just either they don't have parking space, they don't care, you can't educate that. So the good news is that with the new system, people were quite happy when they did get a ticket to call up and say, there is a new system. The piece with September to November, what we found in that project window was people came back to university and college and they got, whether they got used to it or not, the education piece is helpful at the beginning of the school year. So when they come back in Labor Day, they learn the parking process and rules and regulations at that point and not have to retrain again at some other point later in the month. So we found that helpful. And we also had a lot of complaints because I don't know if you recall, but that one report that we did, we outlined how many vehicles were on streets, and some streets had 40 vehicles on them. And so it was an overload and excess, and it was being highly taken advantage of. So that's why we recommended to leave it as is. We don't have to change signage, which would be about $15,000 to change the signage, and just leave all the meters have stickers on them, and all the entrances to the city have signage. So we felt a reasonable solution was to keep it the way it was. It worked fairly well as far as education, as far as cost, and as far as how many times. If it was deemed that it wants to be expanded, of course, we'll follow that, but that was just our recommendation.
Thank you very much. And of course, we've got 48,000 passes that we did give out, so that's about 3 times as many people using it than getting a ticket. If I may, just through the chair, ask, did the people that had the many occurrences, did they also use the free passes and run out of the 15, or did they just not use it at all, or do you know?
Through the chair, I did some random tests, and for the very high ones, did not use passes.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there's no further questions or comments on these items, then I'll ask the clerk to open the vote on this.
Open the vote. Closing the vote. Motion pass 4-0.
All right, that brings us to the consent item number 2. So I'll, and which Councillor called, was that Councillor Armstrong you called number 2?
Yes, thank you. Very quick questions for all the ones that I asked to be pulled. Just on number 2, were there any concerns raised by the residents where these changes are being made? and/or has any councillors raised any concerns? I know a couple of them were in my ward, and I don't have concerns, they make sense. But I'm just wondering if anybody raised any concerns. And if the public later on has a concern, can we come back here and readdress whatever change has been made if it's maybe the wrong thing to do for whatever reason?
Thank you, through the chair. Prior to coming to committee, particularly when we make a change in a number of these areas, we do send out letters so that people are aware of them. But I'm going to ask Mr. McGuire to answer your question.
Through the chair, of going through the report, the no stopping on John Street, well, maybe I can, there were no complaints received or phone calls about any of the changes. We thought there might have been a little bit of questions about John Street because we were going to a no stopping there during that evening peak time, but again, we didn't hear anything from the letters that we sent out.
Good enough. That was consultation and an opportunity. So thank you, staff, for that.
All right, thank you. At this point, I'm going to actually ask for an amendment on this. So if I could have the my vice chair take over.
I will.
Take over from there.
I will. Mr. Chair?
Thank you very much. On page 9 of our original agenda and on item 2, there's near Trafalgar School, we're putting in signs for reduced speed limits on Trafalgar and on Oliver Street, but also on Cameron Street. And this is one where I don't think that signage is necessary. I don't think we need to spend the taxpayers' money on there for a sign because that street is so short that you can't get up to an appreciable speed. You couldn't, I tried it, I can't get up to 50 kilometers an hour and still make the stop sign or the fence at the back. And there's only a few houses on it. There's also parking on the street there, so it's very thin. It's the kind of place where you would never consider driving fast. And as we know, we tend to drive based on the conditions. So I don't think signage needs to be on that street. So I'll move that be removed and perhaps look for a seconder.
While we're doing that, we'll get the motion up. Maybe staff can just comment on that particular street or what your view is of that.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. There's been a lot of discussion about this policy and over the course of the last number of meetings. We're trying to really keep blocks very consistent. In this case here, it was strictly applying the policy. I would agree with the councillor that you can't get to 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers on this roadway because it is short. And so if it's the wish of the committee, we can definitely remove that.
Thank you very much. Other councillors? Councillor Armstrong?
Well, first of all, thank the councillor for looking at things in such detail, because obviously, the cost of putting up the sign and the time, I'm sure staff can find somewhere else of more importance. So thank you for pointing that out to us. So I can support that change based on what staff has said and the councillor.
Need a mover and seconder. Can we get that done? Any further discussion? It's also been included as an amendment, so if there's any other general discussion, call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote.
I'll pass it back to the chair.
Motion passed 4-0.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. That brings us to item number 3. And so I'll look to my colleagues. This is Virginia, Councillor Ridley, who.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Morgan wanted to be here and wasn't able to because of a conflict, and so He did ask me to speak to this item, which I agreed to. We received several emails from the community on item number 3, and in there were a lot of questions. And I wonder if staff could speak to whether or not they received the emails. This is in regards to Aldersbrook Gate, and if they can address any of the concerns that were raised in those emails. I know the community, if they're not here today, will certainly be following up and watching, and it'd be nice to hear some of those addressed.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. This issue has been a bit of a long-standing issue related to this roadway itself. I'll refer committee to page number 17, which shows the map which identifies Aldersbrook Gate as a gateway into the subdivision. So what I'll start off by saying is this roadway was designed as a secondary collector. It is meant to bring people and residents and drivers into the subdivision to the south. And it's operating as intended. That is its purpose. Its purpose is to provide a relief for the community here to get up to Fanshawe. It's not meant to be a private roadway. It is a secondary collector to move people from one roadway to the other. It does not exhibit cut-through traffic. It is the local neighborhood that uses it. And when you look at the map there, realistically, there's only a few ways for people to get in and out of this neighborhood that's bounded by High Park, Fanshawe, Gainsborough, and Wonderland. So from a intended perspective, it is operating as we intended for it to work. In the past, there was probably a lot of residents utilizing this section here to get out onto Fanshawe, given the fact that the area was growing. There was a new development coming in to the west, but that's changed now. Now we have Dalma-Gary, which was something that this council has been pushing forward to make sure that it happened. That connection is in place. There's a traffic signal there, and we've seen, as you can tell from the report, we've provided you some statistics here, that the volume of cars has lowered in this area with the opportunity for people to utilize the other roadway itself. It is a collector, a secondary collector that ties the other collector, Aldersbrook Road, to Fanshawe. It is a signal. So while I appreciate a number of the concerns, we have gone through the concerns with the resident. We've met with them out there in the past. We've seen the additional emails that they provided, but we stand by a recommendation that there really is not an issue here. This roadway is operating as intended. We have done some changes in the past in terms of advanced signage, lowering the speed limit, but from a traffic perspective, from a safety perspective, and from a speed perspective, we believe it's operating as intended.
Thank you. I appreciate that you've reviewed the emails and have addressed them. So what I'm understanding is from an engineering point of view, there's no further changes that we could make to this road that would assist short of closing the road, which we're not going to do.
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. We've looked at the various issues that have been raised. We looked at everything from traffic signal timing to the volumes, and we believe it's operating as intended.
And there was a request about like hidden driveway signs. Have we looked at that option? Is that, will it assist in this situation?
So the purpose of a hidden driveway sign is if there's driveways that are obscured by either shrubs or walls or anything along those lines, to raise awareness that there is a driveway coming up. When you look at the criteria in this particular case, it really is not met. There isn't that obstruction there. Is it something that we can put in to help alleviate the issue? I would say to you it's not really required, but it is something we can maybe go back and look at with the resident. I'd just be hesitant to put out signs that aren't really required, because then we have more sign pollution and we'll have more requests for signage that really is not going to achieve its purpose. Putting up signs that people ignore doesn't help solve the problem.
Thank you. So just to be clear, it's your opinion at this point in time that adding a hidden driveway sign isn't going to solve the problem?
Putting in that sign would be on Alsburg Gate, right at Fanshawe, when you turn the corner. Most people aren't looking for that sort of sign when they turn the corner. They're focused on actually driving the road, and putting up a sign that's basically going to be ignored is really not of much value.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I support staff. The sign, I mean, there's two types of signs. There's a feel-good sign that does very little, but make people feel good, but doesn't do anything. And then there's a sign that's warranted, a sign that's there for a reason and accomplish a purpose. So I think I've heard from staff, and I don't think a sign there would make much sense. But certainly the councillor from the ward, I'm glad that he has taken the time to talk with the other councillor and bring these issues to the committee's attention. And I'm sure if there's further discussion, he'll be at council to again pursue this issue on behalf of his residents. So I had some questions, but mainly on that particular area. So I think I'm satisfied and I can support this. So I'm happy to move the motion.
Thank you. So I'll be looking for a seconder of this motion. Any other further comments on the traffic on Aldersbrook Gate? Okay, thank you. Well, let's call the question then.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 4-0.
Moving on to item number 4, the Blackfire Bridge project status update. Councillor Armstrong requested this item.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Chair. I just had a question on the design of the bridge. I guess there was some concern about the openings of the railings and that they don't meet standards that we have today, but we're going ahead and reinstalling them because, well, for aesthetics and for historical purposes. So the only question I had is, and I maybe didn't catch the whole picture here. Are the openings too large in this design? Is that what the issue is?
Through the chair to Councillor, that's correct. I believe they're larger than what's stipulated in the standard of today. But I'll ask Mr. McCray to confirm that.
Thank you. Through the chair, the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code limits the gap width in railings to 150 millimeters. The gaps in the railing design on Blackfriars Bridge, as can be seen in the photo on page 25, at their widest, they reach slightly more than that. They're up to 180 millimeters. So an extra 30, approximately 1 inch beyond what the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code stipulates for today. And we don't feel there's a safety or a performance. We're not aware of any issues that have arisen due to this minor discrepancy in the past. So we feel comfortable reinstating that existing condition that's been on the bridge for 142 years.
Well, I'm sure that, our staff always like to comply to the letter of the law. And so, I mean, was there any other options to look at, for an example, I know we want to keep the aesthetic look, but is there any opportunity to follow the letter of the law and perhaps use some kind of covering on there, like plexiglass or something else, so that you can follow the letter of the law? Because at this point, you're not. That would be my understanding, or are you? And if you're not, should we not be trying to comply? I'm just saying, had you thought of other options to deal with that small gap?
Other alternatives were considered. Plexiglass could be one. Another one would be a sympathetic redesign of a new railing that meets the code. We did look into this and talk to the administrators of the legislation, and they advised that the owner of the asset has the ability and authorization to forgo this aspect of the bridge code. So, so in a sense, we're not in contradiction. And this was reviewed with risk management and legal, and they support the recommendation.
I'm satisfied that our staff made the right decision, so I'll be supporting this.
Okay, thank you. I would note that, okay, Councillor Squire.
I think that bridge is just such an important thing in the City of London. I can't overemphasize that as someone who's spent my whole life here. It's a signature public structure in the City of London. And, you know, I think as a council, there's occasions when we have to step up and make sure we're doing the right thing in terms of our city. You know, whether it was the normal school, the South Street Hospital lands. You know, somebody asked me the other day, well, isn't this going to cost a lot of money? And I said, probably it will, but I don't think Londoners can picture London without the Blackfriars Bridge. So I hope we're doing it right this time. I think we are, and I look forward to getting it done. And I'd like it to look just the way it's looked ever since I've been around London.
Thank you, and if I may, a question through staff. The distance between the railings, is that for vertical railings? Because I know that here we've got a diagonal grid, which would be slightly different, and I'm wondering if the distance would be for just railings that would go up and down.
That gap that we're talking about, it applies to the entire pedestrian barrier. So the issue that we're discussing today is that diamond grid pattern that's shown in the photo. The supports, the posts, and the railing also need to be rehabbed, and they will be brought into conformance.
Okay, thank you very much. Slightly larger holes, you could pull a larger fish through them. Any other comments about the Blackfriar Bridge from my colleagues? All right, well, perhaps we'll call that question, moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
Moving on to item 5, I'll go to you, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And looking at that report, and I can't reference the page, I just want to ask you, somewhere in there talks about our contribution will bring water and sewer. And so I wondered, do we have a cost for water and sewer, or guesstimate, or any information what that cost is?
Through the chair, at this stage, because we haven't got into that level of detail with any of these potential companies, it's very difficult to know because we don't know what the requirements will be. And that is a key part of signing this memorandum, is to develop that work together to figure these things out. And then, as you know, in here, we would come forward with a business plan to clearly identify the costs for both parties. Part of our commitment, though, is because we have our recycling center there, we have services at a facility, we would basically take them over a number of meters to more or less bring them to the next area where these facilities demonstration could be set up. So we're looking at something in the order of $50,000 to $100,000, but all to be determined and brought back forward to committee and council.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I just wasn't sure what was on site and how close it was, but obviously staff are aware of the distances and can estimate things out. So there's not going to be $1 million sewer project here all of a sudden. So, okay, that's great. Thank you. I can support this.
Okay. Councillor Squire.
Through you, Mr. Chair, one of the things is always in the back of my mind is a debate we had a couple of years ago about diverting waste from our landfill so that, divert costs down the road. In other words, we wouldn't have to go into a very expensive program that would affect taxes. Is this part of that? Is this part of that, going down that road to find a better way to divert things from our landfill, or is this separate from that? Because I haven't really heard a lot. I should have known about the London Waste Resources and Innovation Center. So can you help me there?
Through the chair, you're exactly correct. These are key pieces of looking into the future, but trying to move that future forward more quickly. Programs such as this, to get them off the ground, they have to move into pilot modes. And what we have available around our landfill site, of course, is the opportunity to bring in this because we have the land. Council has put in special policies to allow these types of facilities to be on those lands. We're moving into a situation with both firms here, as well as another one that we have a signed MOU, where we really are looking at new and emerging technology. And that is a key part of our resource recovery strategy. And we've been here before with you saying, we're looking at current proven technologies that are out there in Ontario, such as the Green Bin program. But we're trying to really test the grounds to find out how close those other systems are to being a reality. Are they 10 years away? Are they 5 years away? All that information will be brought back forward to you later this year into next year. And most important was our commitment to you already, that is a key part, is to look at how we transition programs. If we're not there yet, how do we get to there sooner by making sure that we don't do a program now that locks us in for 20 years in a direction that is not correct after 10.
Yes, and two of these involve biochar, which is creating a charcoal out of biosolids, and that can be used as a soil additive, which has a number of beneficial properties in certain places. Councillor Armstrong, you also pulled number 6, which is a similar one. Did you have similar questions, or did you want to deal with those
Yeah, it
separately?
was a similar question, so I think I'm good.
Okay, so
Thank
perhaps
you.
I'll ask the clerk to add number 6 to this as well, because they were very similar.
We'll have to vote on it separately.
Okay, we'll vote on those separately then. So this is moved and seconded. I don't see any other questions. We'll call this one.
Mike?
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
Okay, and another similar memorandum of understanding with this Hawthorne Green Key Group this time. It's very similar. And so I'll look for a mover or seconder on that. The questions were similar, unless anyone else has questions about these. Okay, so some new and exciting technologies may be emerging from the area, and we'll make that happen by calling the vote.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
Okay, the next item that was pulled is number 10 on the Clean Water and Wastewater Fund. And I think, Councillor Armstrong, was that you as well that pulled number 10?
No, I think I'm good on that one. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we'll look for a mover or seconder on number 10. Right, let's call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
All right, so we're purchasing some odor control systems. So I think a lot of people would like that. And now we're moving on to item number 19, Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read this report and certainly I'm supportive of it, and I hope I didn't create any panic for staff when I pulled in and said I want to make an amendment, because certainly we need to do it, right? We need to staff appropriately to deliver the programs that we're committed to doing. But what this raised for me, once again, is our staff housing and accommodation issue. And so you know, we're bringing on, is it 5 or 3 staff? 5, I believe. And we're saying we need to look at more office space for 5 staff. If we are busting at the seams that much that we need to look at new space for 5 staff, I really think that we need to start looking at how we accommodate our staff a little bit differently. I think that there's a cultural shift that can happen, and it needs to be investigated to have more flexible working space for staff, including the ability to work at home and hotel. And I think that we need to really carefully examine our rationale for having staff work at structured spaces. So I would like to add a part D. And I would actually like it to be the wording that I sent to the clerk. I think there's a kind of a condensed wording up there, and so I'll read it out. That I would like to direct our CAO or delegate to begin consultation with our unions and management and report back to the appropriate committee about opportunities to create a more flexible work arrangement, including opportunities for employees to primarily work at home with shared space available on an as-needed basis. I did have opportunity to have a conversation with our CAO, who was quite supportive of taking a look at this. I know he can't be here today, but he had no concerns when we spoke about this, that he would be happy to undertake those conversations and start that process. We have 2,000 employees in the City of London, and I think we have a culture, a mindset that has, you know, you need a desk, you need a filing cabinet, you need a computer, and I really think it's time that we start looking at this a little bit differently. Personally, I have a job where I work from home, and I have a colleague who works in Quebec City, and it works swimmingly. We have no issues at all. So I think that if we start really thinking about this and working through some of the logistics of it, I'm not saying it's perfect and we can do it tomorrow. There's logistics we need to do. But I think that we can start moving in that direction and ultimately saving the City of London some money. So I'm supportive of the main motion at this time, but I do feel it's important to make that amendment. And I wonder if I need to send the wording to the clerk again for the part C, or is that a part D, or she has the wording? So if I could make a motion to amend it with the new language, hopefully I have a seconder for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Armstrong now while that wording's being.
Well, this is certainly an interesting issue, because I've sort of, in my world of work, I've had people who worked from home and worked in an office. So I've been in both situations, and I can see the benefits in both. But when people work at home, there can be quite a few issues, because where is home? Home can be anywhere. It can be at your cottage. Home can be on your boat. Home can be anywhere. And so, you know, because you can take a laptop, there is the internet, there is wireless, and if that's your mechanism of communication, a cell phone, I guess the thing is, I mean, you could get to the point where maybe half the staff in the city could justify working from home, and then I guess you got to look at the issue of, you know, if you can do it, then who do you say yes to and who do you say no, and that sort of thing. I mean, this is a very big picture and would be a very big change in how the city does business. And I guess the thing is, there is unions involved, could be potentially. So I think that part of this conversation, because we do have collective agreements, those collective agreements would potentially be affected by this discussion on this strategy. So I'm not sure if we should be having a discussion, first of all, in public about potential changes that could affect our employees in our contracts. And I mean, I can think of a lot of different angles to look at on this one. So I'm not sure if this is an issue. Obviously, there's been some discussions, and I'm not against looking into any new situation, but I think the thing is, this has to be handled appropriately, you know, because of the implications for labor. Because there can be all kinds of implication. Maybe you're only paid for the time you're on the phone or your time on an internet. This can change a lot of things. So in any event, I just want everyone to keep that in mind when going into this. And I certainly appreciate the counselor suggesting this and suggesting that we look into it, because we should always be looking for more new ideas. Whether we pursue them or not, it's a different story, but nothing wrong with innovation. So in any event, I just want to ask you, Chair, through you to the counselor, with her discussions, does she feel that this should first be dealt with in camera so that we know what parameters, or I don't know how you want to work into this. I just don't want to do things off the fly and find we have an issue.
Councillor Ridley, perhaps you can answer the question about your intent to the councillor.
Wonderful. And the motion and the wording is up on screen, and it was a very deliberate language that I provided with the clerk, and I want to make sure it was captured in there because I absolutely agree with Councillor Armstrong. This is going to be a long discussion. I'm not suggesting that we make a change tomorrow or that we're directing our CAO to make a change, but rather to begin the consultation. It's important that the union and labor is included, and that's in my motion, as well as management. I think what I'm looking for is a report back to the appropriate committee, which will likely be the CSC committee, about where there are opportunities. There are so many logistics that absolutely need to be worked out. We need to be mindful of the health and safety of our employees. We need to be mindful and respectful of collective agreements that are in place. I think there are spaces that this will work and spaces that they won't. And unfortunately for our staff here, this conversation doesn't have a lot to do with the engineering staff, but wasn't an opportunity to raise this again, that I think this needs to be a part of our discussion. I think there's a lot of statistics out there which show and prove that it is beneficial to employers to embrace more flexible work arrangements like this for a lot of reasons, including better work-life balance for employees and a number of things. So the motion that I'm asking the committee to support today is not to necessarily support going in this direction, but to support beginning the conversation so that we know at a later date and have the information available to us is if logistically this is a direction we can go in or not. So I thank the councillor for raising the concerns he did. Certainly I'm very aware of them and in agreement, and I think that the conversation needs to be started with both management and unions. I don't believe that this is an in-camera discussion at this point. Perhaps information will come back that's of a personnel, and they'll determine the appropriateness of a public discussion. But I think at this point, our CAO is certainly open to this, and I think that those conversations need to start happening so that we are making a good decision moving forward. There are significant cost-saving benefits, and I know the councillor is well aware of what space costs the city on an annual basis. So if we can find ways to reduce that, by starting these conversations. It may not happen for the next 5 or 10 years, but we need to start the conversations, and we need to shift our mindset to how we work and how we get work done in the City of London.
Thank you, and thanks for the precision in the wording of your motion. Councillor Squire.
I've made it clear in the past, and I'm going to make it clear again, that I don't like voting on things when they just appear on a screen in front of me without any prior notice. I'm going to start maintaining that position, so I'll be voting against it for that reason. But the second thing is I'm not understanding, is this flexible work hours across the city's entire workforce, just the wastewater workforce, just these new positions? I'm not understanding which it applies to. I'll be voting against it because I didn't know about it till about a minute ago, but I'd like an answer to the other one. Is it a larger scale examination of the workforce of the city as a whole, or is it one part of the workforce?
I guess that's a question that Councillor Ridley can answer for you.
Thank you, and I respect the councillor's point of view on a last-minute amendment to a motion. This was something that I looked at last night and did not provide the committee with notice of. I think it was 10 p.m. before it was finally resolved, but I certainly could have sent out an intent this morning. So I do apologize for that to the councillor, and I respect his position on voting against and needing the time to think about it. My intent is that it was raised in this context because we're creating these new positions and there's a need for space. But my intent is that the CAO or whoever he delegates it to be directed to begin consultation across the city. I think we need to look at all of the areas and carefully examine what are our rationales for needing a structured workspace. Are there areas that people could work from home remotely? What could that look like? And I think it's important that we get that information back to say, you know, perhaps it's not possible and there's good rationale, but perhaps it is possible in a number of areas, and we could see significant cost savings by doing that. So this is really just starting the discussion. I'm not looking for a change overnight, but I think we need that discussion to start happening.
Thank you. And of course, at committee, we can extemporize ideas too. So if there's bringing something forward here is better than certainly than council. Councillor Armstrong, you had.
I just also want to be clear, it's a slippery slope here, and I just want to be clear what I'm voting for, and that this isn't down the road going to create an environment for contracting out of work, because obviously if people never have to be here, then there's an opportunity for people to bid on that work. I can tell you, I've had staff that I haven't seen in a year or longer who totally work from home. And there are probably some functions in this municipality where you really aren't required to come in, that you can look at a file, do what you need to do, send it back, and that's it. Or write a report, or whatever the case may be. So the thing is, I just want to make sure that this isn't moving towards an opportunity to contract out work now existing or anything like that, or create an environment for bidding for work. And as long as that's clear, because if that's where we're going, then I whatever point I'll be out on this, because I can't support that. So I just want to make sure that jobs are protected, and that we're not looking to change things that way.
Thank you, Councillor Squire.
I guess my concern is if we're talking about beginning this discussion across the entire corporation, I would suggest that's a mammoth discussion. The second thing is the instruction is to start discussing this with the unions before coming back to council, and it does make me uncomfortable that we're choosing the Civic Works Committee to sort of go in this direction of the entire work staff of the City of London. Maybe a great idea, I don't know, but I find it to be kind of a strange way to go at this, is to say this committee with 4 people is going to make a direction that staff and unions start talking about something. I don't know if it's on the radar for our senior management. I don't know why this is coming up now. So I'd love to have a discussion about it, but not in this context, so I will be voting against it.
Thank you. And I guess there will be the opportunity to split this out at council, or even refer it back to another committee. Any further comments, Councillor Ridley?
Thank you. I appreciate the comments from my colleagues. I'm going to suggest to the chair that you do split out Part D. I would hate to see people voting against the need for staff based on the amendments, so I think it is wise to do Part D separately. I think, you know, I think I've been clear with my intent. It's to start the discussion, to look for those opportunities, to make sure that we're not moving in a direction without consulting with all the people that are going to be affected by it, and that includes the staff, the management. I think there are many parties that need to be included in this discussion. In no way is this contracting out. This is about looking at the space requirements for the City of London on a moving forward basis as we continue to grow. And this was just one example where we're growing and it's causing increased capital costs that we need to look at.
Sure. And of course, I'll go to Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. So a question through the chair to our staff. How many of these full-time equivalents are you intending to hire right away?
So through the chair, there's some urgency in having these positions come on board as soon as we can in order to staff and facilitate the delivery of both the Phase 1 work for Clean Water Wastewater Fund as well, ensure we're prepared to participate in the pending Phase 2. So I think from what I read from the councillor's motion, there's no intent to delay our ability to proceed as outlined, and therefore we would not have a specific concern with the motion, but we need to be clear that we need to staff conventionally and house conventionally until a larger discussion and a program were developed.
Right, I'm not actually asking about Councillor Ridley's amendment at all. I'm just interested in how many of these people you're going to hire and how quickly.
Sorry, through the chair, the intent would be bring as many of them on as we can, as quickly as we can, all of them.
Okay, so it says in the report that the financial allocation for sort of the full complement increase is something like $2 million. I imagine that the federal funding is not going to be able to cover the staff costs of the additional staff we're bringing on. I just wonder if we could address that, whether that could be cost shared through this infrastructure program or whether that's something that's entirely borne by the municipality.
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar is here and he can explain how the finances will work for this process.
Through the chair, yes, you correctly identified in the report there was $2 million annually for these costs. The savings that we've identified in report number 16 was a total of $20 million, just over $20 million in reserve fund contributions that would not be required. And so our intention is to redirect those contributions in future budgets back into the operating budget, and then the operating budget would support these positions.
So I take that as an answer that, yes, the federal government money is not going to be able to go to fund this operating cost. Okay, so to my colleagues, I would say I have a couple of concerns about it. Number one, first I want to say I understand the desire to bring on more staff to deliver the big capital programs, and I think that there's a justification for that. How quickly we do that and when we do that, I think is something we need to think about very carefully. I'm not sure I'm willing to support going all the way to 15 plus 2 corporate services, 17 full-time equivalents, all before we get the 2018 budget amendments before us. This is not the only cost pressure we'll be dealing with in the 2018 budget cycle. The idea of using reserve fund savings because we've been able to accelerate the capital program is an interesting idea, but something I think we need to be dealing with along with many other matters when we're talking about all of the capital spending across the entire organization, and frankly, the operational spending across the entire organization. So my other concern, and this is something I think we need to keep in mind, is that, federal governments come and go. We've got one in there now that wants to do an 11-year capital program that's got unprecedented, lots of things. In a couple of years, say 2019, they might not be there. And the other government might have a different idea about infrastructure spending, and we will have brought on all these people to deliver a program that may not exist. So depending on how that happens, I think that's some kind of the uncertainty and contingency planning we need to be thinking about. I certainly hope that the capital program continues because I think it's important infrastructure we need to be building in the city. And if it exists, I think we're going to need these staff resources. But I do think we need to be careful on this front. We had a similarly aggressive transportation infrastructure program, and we didn't really have a lot of staff requests on that side to say we're going to deliver this increased transportation program. But I think we probably will once we get into phase 2 and we got all kinds of accelerated projects. We're probably the same kind of pressures there. So those are my comments for now. I'm not sure what I do at council, but I sort of support the direction, but I'm not sure about the pace, how fast we should do that.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll go to staff to just comment on the permanency of these positions.
So through the chair, these are intended to be permanent positions, and it will take time for us to onboard them, but we don't have a long-term delay that we're looking 2 years, 5 years, 10 years out to bring them on board. We are looking to hire in an area that is facing substantial attrition due to retirement over the next decade, and we're confident that even if there's a change in federal funding, that we are able to absorb these increases. We are also using a strong complement of external support through consultants that gives us more flexibility as well. So we haven't looked at sort of all our eggs in one basket approach, but we do need staff on board to both supervise consultants, inspect work, perform operations on these added assets, and provide us with some of the specialty resources, particularly with respect to hydrological services, that we need in order to move forward some of these fairly ambitious projects related to managing our wastewater more sustainably.
Thank you. Of course, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of projects and funding that require us to have a bigger complement. So I'll look to my colleagues for any further comments. Okay, so this has been moved by Councillor Ridley. So this is A through C.
Just D.
This is just D.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 3-0.
All right, and now let's look at A to C. Moved and second by Councilor Ridley and Councilor Armstrong. Let's call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 3-0.
Thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of our consent items. Now we're moving on to number 12. And this is the Mud Creek watershed schedule, Class B municipal environmental assessment, notice of completion. And I understand we have a presentation from staff.
We do, through the chair. I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Chambers, who's going to walk us through where we've arrived. This has been a multi-year, a decade-long process, and it seems quite simple what we've brought forward to committee now, but I don't want anyone to underestimate the amount of work that has happened both internally and with a number of community stakeholders in order to bring the ball across the finish line, as it were.
Yes, through the chair, I'm very excited today to present a presentation related to the notice of completion for the Mud Creek environmental assessment. I would like to note that there are some stakeholders in the audience. My understanding is they're also in support of finalizing the CA. It's been, as Kelly indicated, about a 10-year process. Other people, staff have also been involved throughout the years, so it's exciting for all of us, I think. This photo just highlights the fact that this area frequently floods. That's Oxford Street, just near that Fleetway Bowling Center, just south of there. And it's been kind of a bone of contention also for developers because it's been in the floodplain quite heavily. So today we did have a pretty extensive report back last fall in October, just discussing kind of the challenges and some delays that have occurred during the CA. But today we're going to present the preferred alternative and move forward with the project. So our problem statement for the CA was to basically mitigate frequent flooding on public and private lands, particularly for Oxford Street because it is an arterial road. It is identified as a rapid transit corridor as well. It's just an important street, as we all know. The other piece is to rehabilitate sections of Mud Creek. Essentially, that photo shows it fairly well that sedimentation in the corridor is very significant, thus reducing the capacity for water to flow and stifling any sort of ecological benefits there. And thirdly, recognizing we would be kind of digging our equipment in and getting kind of down and dirty in the creek, we also have to mitigate and compensate for our recommendations. So it's kind of the objectives of where we're going. Significant stakeholders in this land. There's 54 hectares roughly of undeveloped land. This is kind of in keeping with the London plan and infill more or less because everything around there is developed. So 3 parties in particular are very interested in this study noted there. And if everyone recalls from back last fall, the crux of this issue has always been on this CN rail culvert, which is extremely undersized, basically designed for agricultural lands, and the area as it developed extensively, what with apartment buildings and the Cherry Hill Shopping Mall, you know, just can't keep up that little wee culvert. So that study was kind of like the crux of this whole study. So when we came back last fall, we kind of had a draft proposal to do certain things in the area, and there still was some flooding, and through some correspondence and basically input from some of the stakeholders, we looked at revising some of the modeling to look at other opportunities. So in October, we went back to the drawing board a little bit and tweaked our original proposal. We got some really good feedback, I guess, in a nutshell. This is all to do with, I guess, our engagement piece. We had public meetings, we walked the site with interested homeowners. The people downstream of the CN are very interested in the ecological features with the wildlife that live there, wild turkeys, deer, whatnot. So a lot of public interest there. And lots of meetings with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and all the stakeholders of the developers, as we kind of stated. EPAC, we've met with them, presented them, and they are in favor of our preferred solution as well. So that is, it kind of checks a lot of boxes. So, and when we were developing our alternatives, there's always, of course, a do nothing. Alternative 2 was essentially improving grading, filling the lands, trying to just, I don't know, put Band-Aids on things. It wasn't working out. Alternative 3 was upsizing that CN culvert, but kind of left it not quite as advanced as alternative 4, which actually realigns the creek as well. So back last fall, we came forward with alternative 4, and since the feedback there, alternative 4.2 also involves upsizing 2 more culverts, Proudfoot and Oxford, and a very innovative approach upstream led by the developers. So this is a game changer for the CA. When the developer came forward from the ESAM lands and has kind of stepped up to say, we will contribute to the solution as well, and basically extend the city's objectives north of Oxford. So at this point, we're recommending alternative 4.2. And I will describe that now. So there's the 2 components of it. There's the municipal works. So in our original proposal, we'd always said, this won't probably go, that we would enlarge the CN culvert and do a lot of natural channel renaturalization. So it involves deepening the channel by about 2.7 meters, nearly 8 to 10 feet deeper, and kind of working out from there, and then basically bringing in all native species, a lot of trees. I'll just say here, so basically over 1 kilometer of natural stream corridor with habitat enhancements, 3-to-1 tree replacement ratio, buckthorn removal, and the multi-use pathway. So something that's coming out of stormwater lately are these complete corridors, and that's what we're calling it. We're moving water, moving wildlife, we're moving people. And so it's a very exciting initiative that we were happy to be part of. So then the developer to the north said, well, we would like to get on board as well with that concept and essentially extend the corridor northerly for another kilometer and make it part of the development application. So the exciting part there is that this is basically 2 kilometers of public amenity space as well as a water and habitat corridor. So something special, quite frankly. And elegant. It really confines the floodplain to a nice corridor and again, is really kind of making the best of use of land, I think. So this is our concept of a complete corridor, essentially, is when you have these channels running through the middle with a wider floodplain, that's sort of that flatter area down there, all vegetated sides, allows, this is 60 meters wide north of Oxford. And then you've got the Beaverbrook Road extension as well, and some low-impact development solutions, which is basically infiltrating stormwater. So it's very robust, it's very cutting edge, I'll call it. It's sort of the best in class of what's happening right now. So again, after all this decade of work, I think we're coming to something very special. So maybe it was worth it. Basically what we see now is the purple line is the existing floodplain if we do nothing as of this point, because all the floodplain work was updated from the existing one that's on our current city maps, in conjunction with working with the Upper Thames and getting that floodplain modeling in order. The blue hatched area is now the new proposed flood line that we hope to create through our construction projects. So you'll see it's quite a bit more contained. You can see the benefits to everyone that, you know, basically creating and cutting out this floodplain along the channel is really optimizing the land use. So that's sort of our preliminary draft. And of course, Upper Thames River are the ones that regulate the floodplain, so we're working very closely with them. So again, the 3 steps, this is the 3 processes we brought forward in greater detail back last fall, but basically stormwater has been leading the CA. The development approvals process, so now all of those 3 parties that were very interested in developing the lands can now come forward in parallel with us basically designing and instructing these works. They can come forward for approvals, basically subject to us being finished, then they can go. And of course, the floodplain then has to be changed in consultation with the Upper Thames. So again, more specifically, we would like to file the notice of completion for the 30-day public review. And if everyone is in favor, basically we would go towards the detailed design phase of these works and start construction in as soon as possible, basically recognizing there's always a bit of a time delay with getting approvals from CN. So we'll proceed as soon as we can. Another special thing that's come out of this is EPAC and Upper Thames have requested to be part of the channel design process, just to ensure that a lot of the work that was recommended is implemented in the design. They also have some very specialized folks with aquatics and whatnot that can really benefit this project. So again, just a good news story. Construction phasing, what we'll end up doing is the part from Wonderland Road to the CN firstly, then CN to Proudfoot, and Proudfoot to Oxford. And that'll be where the city's projects end. And that's funded by the Growth Management Implementation Strategy Development Charges. And then northerly will be developer-led works at their own cost. So it'll be a lot of interesting discussions over the next few years on how we roll this out. But that's kind of it in a nutshell there. And that's kind of all I have for today for this presentation. Tried to be brief, but it's very exciting. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
So great work. I'll look to my committee for questions. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation on this. I read this report a couple of times because the first time I read it, I thought, oh, we're removing quite a bit of significant woodland. Read it again with the 3-to-1 replacement and said, okay, you know, that makes it better. Certainly the project that we're doing is going to have multiple benefits. But I still do have some concerns about the removal of the significant woodland and the trees that will be planted to replacement. Are we starting with seedlings? Are we replacing, you know, 3-to-1 with seedlings, which isn't, maybe over time will do that, or will there be varying sizing?
Through the chair, we will be planting more robust plantings than just seedlings, essentially. I think we budgeted almost like a typical city street tree version, so they're quite large. And they will be all native species, where a lot of what's there right now is buckthorn and overgrowth.
Perfect. So that was what I really needed confirmation of, because if we were taking out, you know, significant trees and putting in seedlings, you know, that's very different than putting in 10-foot trees that already, you know, have a good start and can be well monitored and established. So thank you for the presentation. I think it's an innovative project, an interesting project with a lot of benefits.
Councillor Squire.
The north part of this area is in Ward 6. It's a very interesting area. I can tell you that last year at about this time, the planner took me on a walk through the entire area. So I went through the woods, I went along the stream, I went out in the fields, and it's a really interesting area. But I think there's a couple of things. First of all, there was some concern at one point about trees being taken down in the area. I actually went into that area. Those trees were species that were largely invasive. So there was concern, but it was actually a lot of invasive species. The other thing about Mud Creek is it's largely fed by runoff from city streets. So that when I went through, it was almost nothing in existence. So I'm really enthused about this project, and I know my constituents who live in the area are going to be happy about it too, because it's going to allow for the extension of some of the roadways in that area that right now are I'm hearing from them consistently that roadway up in the Good Life area is congested all the time. So it's going to allow for that also. I also want to say that I've heard really great comments since I've been in office about staff's work in this area. And I think that's important to mention, that you've been receptive to input in those areas. But I also have a lot of respect for the owner of that land and their patience in waiting so long to get this area developed. So I think it's a good news story. I'm really looking forward to it happening, because I think it's really going to be beneficial. And hopefully Mr. Mathers will get rid of, you know, for the good work he did, get rid of the paper nameplate, and he can get a real nameplate. So I'm really excited that this has moved forward so quickly. I'm glad it's going to reach an end at some point.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. When I first moved to London, I lived just on the other side of the forest that's near the CN culvert on Proudfoot Lane. And so we used to walk to the grocery store before it closed. through that little pathway system there. So I'm familiar with at least that part of the area. I think the solution is a good one, and certainly I support the results of the EA and the preferred alternative. I don't think we should underestimate the kind of change that's going to happen in this area, though. Like, we're talking about 4 hectares of woodlands just gone, right? Deepening this culvert and creating like a much deeper channel to focus the runoff in that area, and then trying to grow that back. There's references to species at risk and recreating habitat for them. Like, this is a very significant impact on what is there now. I still think it's the right thing to do, but it's not a small thing. It's a very big, significant undertaking. And I think the initial phases of it, when we start dropping all these trees, even though they're invasive, a lot of them, you know, for the folks who actually live in that area right beside that forest, I don't think they're going to react too well to it initially. I think they like those trees and like walking through there, and it's going to take a while before it really comes back to that great area that it is now. So I just wanted to say that I'm glad to see it come to the conclusion that it's come to now. I think especially unlocking the part that's north of Oxford is very important for the long-term growth in the city.
Thank you, and I'm thrilled that we're actually reducing the size of the floodplain. So I don't think it's great when we need the gutters of a bowling alley to augment our stormwater system. Also, the comment, the 3-to-1 tree replacement, that might be helpful in our own tree protection bylaw. I know that there's people hoping to move a tree and then wondering if what's inappropriate, if they could put more trees in, could they remove one? So we might note that that's something that might be applied there. All right, so I'll look for a motion to, okay, I guess I have to push the little button there and see. There, I see the motion. It's been moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. If there's no further comments, let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 4-0.
Okay, so that brings us to item 22, the TAC report, and I'll point out that there was a couple requests in this report. The committee is looking to have staff go over the terms of reference with them, and they're also looking for us to approve their work plan for 2017. And I'll note that the chair of our TAC committee is here, and looks like she's ready to speak. If perhaps I'd go to the chair for a few comments.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about anything on our report, but I think the main thing that we wanted to bring a delegation for was to request that Council and Civic Works work with us on reviewing our terms of reference. So if there are any questions about that, that's probably the most pertinent thing.
Okay, I'll go to see if there's any questions from the committee. I don't see anything, so I believe that we'll be happy to do so. I'll look for a mover and a seconder. The motion will be coming up shortly. There we are. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Ridley. There's no further comments. Let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Oh, whoops, sorry.
I'm sorry, Councillor Helmer.
So I hate to be a pain, but item number 6 in the report is specifically asking the Civic Works Committee to give feedback on the terms of reference. And is the idea that there's no feedback mean we think the terms of reference is great, no changes should be made, you're doing a great job? Because they're specifically asking for feedback on their terms of reference.
Okay, thank you. Do you have, I noted that there were some changes made to the wording of the work plan. Would the chair care to comment on any changes you've made it so far?
We did make some changes to our work plan, partly in response to the meeting that you attended. What we're looking for guidance, I guess, and for the Civic Works Committee to work with us on going forward is actually looking at our terms of reference. So there's some specific issues that came up in the committee before you attended. So things like the composition of the committee. And then there were some issues that have arisen more recently about the content of the terms of reference and whether it aligns with what the committee's looking for, as well as whether we have the tools and ability to fulfill some of the aspects of that mandate. So that's really what we're requesting that Civic Works work with us to review.
Thank you very much. So, are there some comments on that? Is something you'd like to do at committee now, or is that something we hope to do in conjunction with staff? I'll go to the committee, or Councillor Helmer if you've got any more comments. I know that I attended one of their meetings and talked to them about the work plan itself and read their changes and was pleased with those, but perhaps there's other points that someone would like to make. Oh, Councillor Squire.
Yeah, just if it's any, I actually looked at them and I thought they were pretty comprehensive. I thought they were well thought out and I didn't really have a big issue with their terms of reference from what I saw. And I apologize if you were looking for, I should be giving positive feedback, and I think you did a very good job with it. I'm more than content with it.
Okay, I'll point out that it is a council policy to review the terms of reference periodically, and so that's something we can definitely do, and we could also have our committee look at that and come back at the next meeting. But I'll go to Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. And so I wonder if there's comments from both the clerk's office and the staff here today on the terms of reference. From the clerk's office specifically, I did understand that there was a review taking place, and so I wonder if I could get any context as to where that is at. And from our engineering staff, perhaps they have some comments. I think I reviewed this and I was anticipating a little bit more time to think about it and work with staff about it, recognizing the committee probably intended to have feedback at today's meeting, but I really was looking for a bit more time on it. So if we're looking to approve this today, certainly that wasn't my intent. It was to really kind of digest this and speak to our staff and assess the needs of the committee. So to the chair, I wonder if both clerk staff and engineering staff are able to comment on this, and if the chair of the committee could also let us know when they were looking for comments on this.
Thank you. I'll go to the clerk first. She has something up.
Yes, I was just going to mention earlier that it is a council policy to do a review on a regular basis. Councillor Ridley is quite correct. There is currently a direction out there to put together a process for looking at all of the advisory committees and the structure as a whole. That has been set back a little bit because of other things that have come up in the interim. However, it will proceed. In terms of this moment in time, certainly the committee could refer the terms of reference to its next agenda for an opportunity to give this some thought and report back. It's not uncommon for an advisory committee to do a self-assessment as such of their terms of reference to inform council as to what's working for them and what's not. Certainly the advisory committee could come back to this committee and say, this is our work plan. Once it's approved, this is our work plan. In order for us to fulfill that work plan, we feel it would be better served by amending the terms of reference in whatever form you feel might be appropriate. You have that ability to make those suggestions. The committee could then take those suggestions into consideration along with their views on the matter and then make a recommendation for any changes they feel are relevant in the interim, pending that overall review of all the advisory committees.
Thank you, and perhaps I'll go to the staff with suggestions for a path forward on looking at this terms of reference.
Thank you to the chair, to the committee. Definitely, as Mrs. Rose indicated, there's always opportunity to review terms of reference. And not to create more controversy here today, but there's a lot of duplication with this committee in terms of its membership with the Cycling Advisory Committee. And some of you may be aware that when this originally started, it was staff's intention to have one Transportation Mobility Committee, where it looks at cycling, the aspect, and the other aspects that have been identified underneath this committee's mandate. When you look at the membership here, I would say almost 75% of the membership is a duplication of the Cycling Committee, Advisory Committee itself. So from a workload perspective, duplication perspective, I would actually request that council consider sending this back to the staff so we can maybe come back to you with some of our suggestions in terms of potentially even going back and looking at combining those two committees and seeing how they interrelate, because it seems to be a lot of membership on here, like the Cycling Advisory Committee appoints a person to this committee appoints a person back to Cycling Advisory. And when you go to these committees, they talk about the same things a lot of the time as well. So I guess what I'm requesting or asking here is that we be given the opportunity to go back and provide some input on potentially combining them into Transportation Mobility Committee.
Thank you. So I'll look to our committee to see if anyone would move such a request from staff. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. And before we do, I had asked as well if the chair could comment on the expected timeline for committee and council to consider this. So I just wonder if we can get that answer. I don't know if you were looking for an answer today.
I don't think we have any particular timeline in mind. Before the end of our term would be great. We weren't necessarily expecting a lot of specific feedback today. Really, what we wanted was to work together rather than just go away and come back with our ideas. We thought that it would perhaps be more efficient to actually work together, maybe have a counselor attend a meeting and go over things with us so that we can make sure that what we are suggesting aligns with what council and staff expects of the committee.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. And so I think in light of everything I heard, I would be interested in referring this to staff to kind of assess where those overlaps and duplications happen, report that back to this committee. I don't think I need it in a month, especially if the timeline's, the end of the term, kind of looking to the future of where we need to be. I would like them to, look at both committees' composition, what is on the agenda of both, and report back if there is, in fact, a duplication or an overlap here. If there's an opportunity to use those who volunteer with the city in a more effective way, I think that's worth doing. If it's adding a couple of things to an agenda, and that means both committees are now one committee, and looking at a bit broader of a scope, that may be very worthwhile doing. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to investigate that and to make a decision on a path forward. So I think we now have kind of what the committee thinks that they should be doing. I'd like to hear from staff about both of the committees. And in fact, if it does make sense to merge those, as Mr. Soldo, I think, indicated it might make sense to do, I wouldn't mind getting that back in a report before we move this forward. So I would make that motion if the wording can come up.
Okay, thank you. So I'll look for that.
Okay, I'm not sure I got the transportation.
So that's being prepared. Yeah, I'll ask the councillors who have moved and seconded this to just withdraw those while the clerk prepares a new motion.
Let's see if this is what you guys okay. I think I've got this one. Okay, take a look at that and see what you think.
Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I think the idea that Mr. Solo came up with and my colleagues have moved, I think is a good one. I think it's always healthy to say at certain points that we're going to look at committees. You know, I don't think there's any organization that doesn't create committees and then at some point finds out that there's duplication. I don't think that's unusual. And when we're talking about volunteer hours and people who are coming into meetings, I think, you know, this is a healthy process and I'm going to be supportive of this.
Any further comments? All right, so that's been moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
There's two more things we're going to deal with. The next one is our deferred items list, and I'll go to Ms. Scher to talk about some of the changes.
Thank you, through the chair, which rhymes with share, just handily. We have made a few changes at our mid-year review of our deferred items list. They reflect a variety of reasons for changing some of the deliverable times. Some cases we hadn't actually assigned one, and we wanted to make sure there was one so you knew when we were coming back. The rest of them reflect either limitation on resources, some of the emerging work that's happened with BRT over the most recent few months, and in a few cases, negotiations with external partners. I believe we have everything on this list that is doable by year end, and we continue to be moving quite aggressively, actually, reducing the length of the list. I know when I started last fall, it was about 3 times as many pages. So I'd love to see at some point a deferred items list that has nothing on it. I don't believe that's probably a practical thing, but I appreciate a committee's indulgence in giving us a bit of flexibility in managing our workload.
All right, Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments on that. Is there anything that's on this list that the Civic Administration would recommend at this time to be removed from the list, or is it all manageable within the revised work plan? Noting that, you know, just at a glance, there's a couple of things that I see that can now be removed based on meetings today and the last meeting, but perhaps you have further comments.
Through the chair in our review, there is one piece of work that is being delivered by planning, but will still report back to Civic Works. The remainder of it we do intend to bring back or will be removed as a result of the meeting today, but the process is to remove that after it's been considered by council in case council does not concur with committee.
All right, thank you. I'll look for a mover and a seconder of this. Councillor Ridley, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make it known to the chair that I do have some additional business, so I think we can do this, and then I'd like to ask a few questions after.
Absolutely. So looking for a seconder for the deferred matters list. Thank you, Councillor Ridley, moved by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
And we have an added item of additional business from Councillor Ridley, so I'll go to the councillor.
Thank you. I have a question to staff and maybe some comments at first. I've been getting a lot of traffic calming requests. I think I'm getting 3 or 4 a week of people who are saying, you know, they're speeding, there's traffic issues, you need to do something. Ward 10 has a lot of speed bumps and traffic calming already, and I don't know how widespread, you know, these requests are throughout the city or how widespread of an issue it is, but I wonder if staff can explain what a traffic calming study is. How is it triggered? Every time I say, hey, there's a problem on this road, does that trigger a traffic calming study? How much do they cost? I know I asked for probably a couple a month at least. And I don't know if you have an idea of, you know, how many requests for traffic calming studies have been received on either a weekly or a monthly or an annual basis, or if you can give me a ballpark on that. I'm just curious as to, is this a Ward 10 issue? Is it widespread? And I don't know if staff can provide any info on that. I'll
go to Mr. Solda.
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. Traffic calming is an initiative that I would say is really focused on areas where there's potentially cut-through traffic, and what we're seeing in, ironically, in some of the newer subdivisions, people are moving in and their anticipation of what they're moving, the neighborhood they're moving into may be different than what actually is there. First and foremost, I would say that we get a lot of traffic calming requests. We had 98 requests that we dealt with in 2016. About 56 that we've dealt with or in process of dealing with in this year. We get more complaints than that. We do talk to individuals and are able to steer them away from the process, given the council approved policy. Council approved policy was done about 3 or 4 years ago. And it's very defined in terms of there's a pre-screening portion first. We go through when we get a complaint, and we look at a number of criteria, and does it meet all the criteria moving forward. Sometimes you get a request on a short street that might be 100 meters long for traffic calming. Similar to what we talked about earlier tonight, you can't even get up to speed on a length of roadway like that, so we tell people that doesn't meet the criteria, we don't look at that. There's certain roadways that don't have any volume, and again, just because you have 100 cars on your street in a day, if you have one car that's speeding, that's not really a problem. So we really try to quantify, is there a problem or isn't there? So there's this pre-screening of the actual issue, and then we look at, and then once it's gone past that point of pre-screening, we'll do a traffic study. We'll look at speed, we'll look at the collision history, we'll look at volume. And what I can say to you is that as staff, 99.9% of the time I can tell you what the result of that study is going to be prior to us even doing that study. Because a lot of these roadways, while they may be perceived problems, going through the study itself and then taking the results of that study into our assessment process, we have a very defined process where we look at, we give points to various criteria such as collisions, traffic cutting through, volume, speed, high speed. There's our sidewalks, this is a pedestrian generator. It comes out with a number at the end of the day. And again, the majority of these requests don't qualify for traffic calming. So in this year, we've had, of all the requests, we've had 4 so far out of 56 that qualified. The process after that is then we go and we do a survey as a city of the residents that are going to be impacted by that traffic calming. And you may recall the policy is that we need more than 50% of the residents on that corridor to actually approve the traffic calming before we move forward with it. Otherwise, if we had anything less than that, you would have people putting a petition to take out the traffic calming. So we want to make sure we have firm support for traffic calming. And at that point, I would say to you, majority actually don't succeed because there has to be support from the entire street to move forward. So that begs the question, why have the policy? It really is meant to deal with areas where there is a problem. But the issue we're running into is a perceived problem. And, you know, do we move forward with that? In terms of costs, when you take into account staff time, when you take into account actually undertaking the studies, because you have to go and collect the volumes, you have to collect the speeds, we're spending about $40,000 a year. And when you think about we're spending $40,000 a year, we might have 4 or 5 that proceed to the next step. We have to ask ourselves, is that value for money? Is that something that we should be proceeding with? It takes about, a standard study, I would say to you, takes about half a day of staff time to review, process, analyze. Some of the more complex ones take a little longer. And then when people, or the person that has put it forward disagrees with you, it takes more time. So the process and the policy has been in place for about 4 years. The Transportation Association of Canada just recently updated their traffic calming guide. The City of London was a sponsor of that. I sat on the national committee. We've updated the various tools and methodologies. Is really meant to learn from other municipalities and best practices, what they're doing for traffic calming across across Canada. And one of the things that I think that we will be doing as staff is going back and looking at our policy to see we can incorporate the practices across the country, because there is some changes that have been done, not only in terms of process, but also in terms of what some of the solutions can be. And some of the solutions that we currently have in our policy, we don't follow anymore, because we know that, quite frankly, they don't work, and others that do. So I seem to have forgotten all the questions from the councillor, but the cost, I believe I've identified there, and let me know if I need any other explanation.
Councillor.
Thank you. No, I think you covered it well. And, you know, coming from Ward 10, I can say, I know off the top of my head, at least 30 streets where I've made requests to say, because I've had constituents come to me and say, we have a traffic problem, we have a speed problem here. And I haven't been sure of how to deal with that. So my best option has been to send it to engineering and say, is there a problem here? Can you do the study? But recognizing there's a cost with that. I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did review the Vision Zero report, and I see that our emphasis in 2017 is on things like red light running, excessive speed in residential streets, pedestrian crossovers, the speed limits. But I also wonder if some of the other cities that have adopted Vision Zero, you know, are we looking at their best practices, and can we? And so I actually have a motion that I'd like to make that kind of ties in the traffic calming and what we're doing already with Vision Zero. And it's to ask the Civic Administration to provide council with an overview of cities who have adopted Vision Zero and what their best practices are in terms of speeding on local streets. So I know that, you know, this is a problem throughout the city. I know I've talked to my colleagues and we're all asking for the PEEP boards and traffic studies and enforcement. And I do think we need to take a broader look at what other places are doing to address this issue, so we at least have that information to move forward. I don't know that my emailing twice a week to say, can you do a traffic study on this street and that street and this street and that street, is truly the most effective way. And I also live in a ward where people have a lot of traffic calming and they say, can you get rid of these speed bumps? It's ruining my car. I hate it. It doesn't actually solve the problem. So having that push and pull, I think there has to be a better way to deal with this. And I think I would like to know what other cities are doing. And I hope that you're willing to do that work and report back to us and perhaps give us some other options in our toolbox, because I don't know that we're being effective in what we're doing if I'm getting 2 and 3 requests, you know, on a weekly or monthly basis. So I think the motion's up on the screen. Hope my colleagues will support getting some more information.
Thank you. And if I may, through the chair, I had a situation in my ward very recently where the citizens hoped for a stop sign at a road, at an intersection to make it a 4-way stop in order to deal with some of the speeding through a residential thing, which is not necessarily why we put the stop sign in, but the traffic study was done. And we found out that it would have actually needed 7 times as much traffic in order to warrant a stop sign. So really many of these things are, as was said, you know beforehand, there isn't really a chance for a warrant. I wanted to ask staff about the possibility of the flexible bollards I've seen a couple times in where we have construction zones and in a couple other places. They're in the middle of the street. They've got they're reflective. I suppose they could say something like slow or residential, but when people encounter something like that in the middle of the road, is that something we could do on those streets to make a difference? Is that something that works?
Thank you. Thank you for opening the door here for me. One of the main things that we came back to council with, I believe last time, was an education campaign, and really about educating people, not only about speeding, but other issues on local roads. And you may have seen, as council really indicated, the last report talked about everything from red light cameras to speeding on local roads. So we've started our education campaign. I believe it was this committee that also asked us to look at speeding on local roads. The red light camera, then brace the red. I believe you would have seen that either on the radio and TV and different print. Our next phase of the Vision Zero education campaign really is related to speeding on local roads. And there's multiple tools that we can utilize there, signage on the side of the road, some of the bollards that we used in construction areas. I will say that the bollards have actually, we've had a lot of support for them. We've also had a lot of complaints about them as well, in terms of being something that people don't see, or people park on either side and creates a lot of issues. So I have to say our response rate for that has probably been about 50-50 on my phone. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? But they all come back to the same thing. It's about education. And, you know, one of the things that we can do is come back to you, what are the best practices in other municipalities, especially when those that have undertaken Vision Zero sort of approach to traffic safety. And we can come back to you with a report on not only what we are doing in terms of education, but also what are some of the other things that we could potentially look at, and what are the cost ramifications.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you did bring up the education piece again. Of course, we've talked about that, and I personally like to see just maybe we need to change some attitudes. I think that was another one of the recommendations that council passed, hoping that people maybe if they leave 5 minutes early, and I'll say this to the people out at home, leave 5 minutes early, slow down, enjoy a safe drive to work or wherever you're going. Right. You don't have to rush. And maybe one day our educational will be up on the billboards that I talk about and try to mention now again. Councillor Squire, you have a comment?
I think, you know, my point of view on traffic studies and that sort of thing is that it's technical. And I think the last thing I want to do is get really in the weeds and start deciding where a stop sign should be or something else should be. Mr. Lucas is going to be leaving, but he may remember we did a traffic study, tried to do one for all of North London. And wow, we had meetings and it was crazy. People wanted all kinds of different things. At one point, people were wanting to ban certain people who didn't live in the area from coming in at certain hours, and it just went on and on and on. And I think the answer is when people believe something and they want something, it's hard to displace that idea out of their mind. And now what you have in an area like North London, where I represent, is four-way stops all over the place. You know, and people are driving between four-way stops, and people tend to think, well, if somebody else has a four-way stop, I'd like a four-way stop. And I can remember Mr. Lucas at that meeting trying to tell people that four-way stops didn't slow people down, and I think people just weren't going to accept that. They just were not going to accept that. So I guess my view is that technical issues should be left to the people who know that information, and that's what I generally do. I say to people, I'm happy to have this looked at, but do not expect me to come back and say the report is wrong and I'm gonna recommend something different, because I don't think that's the best way to go.
I have a pass key that gets me through a gate into the parking lot. I suppose if every residential area had some of those, that would slow things down. I don't suggest that as a serious idea, but more seriously, I'll look to my colleagues to, this has been moved in second. Any other comments? No, so let's call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 3-1.
Okay, so that brings us to the end, unless there's any additional business. Okay, I think I have a motion for adjournment by Councillor Armstrong. Do I have a seconder? Oh, Councillor Squire, thank you. All in favor? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.